Happy New Year, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Starting off the new year great. We're going to start off high rounds great today. I wanted to introduce my new friend who I met at the San Diego Writers Conference, Jesse Leon, who won the Best Memoir of 2022 San Diego Writers Festival, and I couldn't agree more with that selection. So congratulations. And I thought that's what he had to offer in his book and his story in general is something that we as infectious disease and HIV doctors deal with a lot, and would really could use the grounding perspective that he has to offer. So I invited him to come and talk at High Rounds and kick off the new year. So thank you, Jesse, for doing that. And he also has a really strong background like us as well. In the 1990s, he worked in the field of HIV, predominantly in the Latino and African American communities, I think in the mid 90s, before he went on to attend Harvard School of Government, which he's going to talk about a little bit. And I wanted to just read the blurb from your book, which I think is amazing, and then I'll let you go for your talk today. So the book is a memoir called I'm Not Broken, and it's an unflinching and inspiring memoir that tells an extraordinary story of resilience and survival, shining a light on a childhood spent devastated by sex trafficking, street life, and substance abuse. Born to indigenous working class Mexican immigrants in San Diego in the 1970s, Jesse Leon's childhood was violently ruptured. A dangerous and harrowing encounter at a local gift shop when he was 11 years old left Jesse with a deadly secret. Hurt, alone, and scared for his life, Jesse numbed his pain by losing himself in the hyper-masculine culture of the streets and wherever he could find it, in alcohol, drugs, and prostitution. Overlooked by state-sanctioned institutions and systems intended to help victims of abuse, neglected like many other low-income Latinos, Jesse spiraled into cycles of suicide and substance abuse. I Am Not Broken is the heartbreaking and remarkable story of the journey of Jesse takes to win back his life, leading him to the steps of Harvard, from being the lone young person of color in Narcotics Anonymous meetings to coming into terms with his own sexual identity to becoming an engaged mentor for incarcerated youth. Jesse finds the will to live with the love and support of his family and friends and mentors. Recounting the extraordinary circumstances of his life, Jesse offers a powerful, raw testament to the possibilities of self-transformation and self-acceptance. Unforgettable, and it is unforgettable. I'm Not Broken is an inspirational portrait of one young man's indomitable strength and spirit to survive against all possible odds. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, Jesse. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Davey, Dr. Smith. Greatly appreciate it. And it's an honor to be here. As you were reading that, I just had these flashbacks, not flashbacks from a trauma perspective, just flashbacks from a hope perspective, thinking, wow, I never thought the day would come in my life where I'm actually speaking to a bunch of doctors, when my relationship with the medical field was somewhat contentious for such a long time, especially regarding bedside manner, and treatment of people of color, especially immigrants, here in San Diego when I was growing up. And you'll understand some of that context in a minute. But just to kind of ease my own nerves, I do want to say that before I start, that although situations and circumstances in my life may have been different than yours and your journeys, to please try to relate to the feelings behind what it was I was going through, and sometimes what I'm going through today. And I need to say that for myself because it's real easy for me to want to separate myself. Rarely feel better than, most of the time feel less than, and suffer from what many call imposter syndrome, as to you're still not good enough. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and it's an honor to be here. Happy New Year. And I figured I would start with a small reading, and just to give context, as I'm not sure who read my memoir, I'm Not Broken. It comes out in January 24th in Spanish. I just got the books yesterday. No estoy roto. Extremely excited about that. So let me jump right in. The book opens and ends at Harvard graduation. And it starts with my brother literally in the middle of the commencement speaker, creeping down the aisles at graduation and standing at the row behind me where I'm sitting with all the Harvard grads from the Kennedy School of Government. And we're in the middle of Harvard Yard. So we have two ceremonies at Harvard. You have the big graduation at Harvard Yard, and then each of the individual schools have their own separate graduation. My brother literally comes up behind me and he starts, "Hey, nerd, nerd." And I'm thinking, wow, because that was his nickname for me growing up when he started bullying me, but the name stuck. And to this day, most of my closest friends call me nerd. And so I'm thinking, what's going on? Why am I hearing my brother in the middle of the commencement speaker? And literally he's standing there and he starts waving at me with this tattooed covered arm. And my brother looks like a gangster, especially back then, covered in tattoos from his neck down. And he's a big guy, muscular. And he's telling me that they're leaving the graduation, even though I had taken out a loan for $2,500 to fly my mom, my brother, his wife, and the two kids to come see me graduate. They were leaving my graduation because it was too hot and there was nowhere for my mom to sit. And one thing about my mom is that at one point, my mom, her health pivoted and she started dealing with severe diabetes. She started dealing with high blood pressure, obesity, and her feet would swell. And they couldn't find anywhere for her to sit, so they left. And they left my Harvard graduation. And I remember just kind of sitting there thinking, only my family. So I wanted to read a piece of that first. And so getting in and graduating from Harvard is a big deal to me. But I understood my mom, who I call Ama, had survived 2 heart attacks and struggled with high blood pressure and severe diabetes. I remind myself that she and my brother had come all the way across the country from San Diego to be here with me. And that's what matters most. And yet the disappointment wells in my chest and in my eyes as I lift my head back up to look forward and face the rest of my big day alone. My best friend Ariel and her mom Joy are here too, but my family leaving still cuts deep. I took out a loan for $2,500 to fly my family out to see me graduate because otherwise they wouldn't have made it. My mother at first wasn't even planning to come because she'd already seen me graduate from community college and UC Berkeley. Those graduations were enough, she'd said. And to her, it didn't make sense for me to incur additional fees on her behalf for yet another ceremony. She didn't understand how significant it was for me, and she didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to make my load any heavier. In the end, I just paid. I wanted Ama, my brother, my little sister, my brother's wife, and my 2 nephews to be here so that they could watch a poor, sexually abused, drug-addicted Chicano kid get his master's degree from Harvard. So fast forwarding about a page or two. The day before I was to leave for Harvard, I was picking up my mom from work. She used to work at a Fremont Elementary here in Old Town. I was picking up my mom from work when the secretary of the elementary school explained to me how Ama had finally accepted that I would be leaving. Ama had been sitting in the school cafeteria during her lunch break between the breakfast and lunch shifts. My mom was a lunch lady. When the secretary walked in, Ama was wearing her hairnet and a work apron over her usual flower pattern blouse. She sat on a plastic school lunch bench in the middle of the cold, drab concrete room. She was crying, all alone, with her head between her hands. Shocked, the secretary asked my mom, "SB, why are you crying? Are you okay?" "Es que mijo, Primero lo perdí a las drogas, luego se me fue para Berkeley y ahora se me va a una escuela en Boston que se llama Harvard. ¿Por qué no regresa aquí a estudiar? Para estar cerca de la familia. Aquí está la mejor universidad en San Diego. Ama pleaded in Spanish. Why didn't I just come home and go to school here to be close to the family? The best university was here in San Diego. The secretary hugged Ama while she sobbed and asked her, "What school did you say your son is going to?" Se llama Harvard, Harvard, allá en Boston. Solo Dios sabe dónde queda Boston. Me dicen que está muy lejos, cerca de Nueva York. ¿Usted se imagina Nueva York? New York. The secretary held my mom by the shoulders, looked at her tear-covered face and directly into her eyes and said, "Are you kidding? It's Harvard." She then went directly to the teacher's lounge and wrote on the board, "Please congratulate Espy. Her son just got accepted to Harvard." And so everyone did. Teacher after teacher, and even the principal came to congratulate my mom that day. Her tears of sadness turned into tears of joy. She looked up to these teachers, and she finally began to understand that Harvard was one of the best and most prestigious schools in the world. And her son, who she had sacrificed so much for, was going to be attending Harvard. Sorry, that always gets me, and I don't know why. Um, so I'm born and raised here in San Diego in a immigrant Mexican family. Both of my dad and my mom are of indigenous blood of Mexico. And my mom is half Chinese and half native from the Huichol tribe of Mexico. My dad is half Spaniard of descent, but Mexican, and half Tarumara, Raramuri, which are the runners, the long distance runners of Mexico. And I had a loving household with some conflict. Obviously, my dad was very machista. There was a lot of fighting, but we lived in this world of oxymorons, of contradictions, where there was a lot of love and compassion, yet there was a lot of fighting and not knowing where I fit in. I'm not good with manual labor. I hate fixing bikes. I hate hammering nails. I didn't like playing sports. I wasn't like my older brother. And I used to love going to the library here in Mission Hills. I would go to the library and I would get National Geographic magazines, and I'd get an encyclopedia that had the topic from the National Geographic magazine. And I would get a dictionary, a giant dictionary, and I would sit on the living room floor and I would get lost in these worlds. Czechoslovakia, or the underground cities of Turkey, Cappadocia, or Cuba. And I would be transported to these places and hoping and praying that maybe one day I'd be able to visit some of these far off places, because no one in the barrio and no one in my poor Mexican family ever talked about traveling. My life consisted of LA, San Diego, and Tijuana. That was the extent of our travels. And so, loving nerdy kid, my brother would come by the living room floor where I'd be, reading and immersed in these worlds, and he'd kick me in the ribs and he'd scream, "Get out of the way, you effing nerd." And the nickname Nerd stuck. Actually, the title of the book was going to be Nerd, an acronym for Never Ending Resilience and Determination, which I love that name, right? Nerd, Never Ending Resilience, Determination. And so I got transferred to Sunset View Elementary in Point Loma in the 4th grade. And that's when the bullying took on an entirely different level. It was one thing being bullied in the neighborhood school, It was totally different when I was being bussed out to predominantly an all-white school in Point Loma and being treated very differently for the color of my skin or how I grew up poor. And at 8 years old, I got diagnosed with hepatitis. And we went to Mexico for over the holidays, and I came back really sick with hepatitis A. Yeah, hepatitis A. And the food one. So a bunch of doctors here, so I'm sure they'll correct me. And back then, I had to be quarantined to my room while my parents were getting hepatitis shots. And I would have to lay out this plastic or like this wax paper on the toilet. I had my own plate, my own spoon, my own fork, my own cup. And I was pretty much isolated to my bedroom for about 60 to 90 days. Um, and I learned that I could manipulate my mom to believe that I was sicker than I really was. So when I got transferred to Sunset View Elementary in fourth grade, shortly after coming back from Mexico, the bullying got so bad that I would spend 2 days a week in the school cafeteria and then beg to be sent home, and they'd send me home. And no teacher, no psychologist, no school social worker, no one would jump in to help. All the while, my poor mom took me to see countless specialists. Each doctor only added to her worry by recommending new tests, such as x-rays, MRIs, CT scans, blood work, and allergy testing. My father would blame my mom for getting me sick all the time, since her mother had suffered from asthma until old age. He blamed my mom for everything. And so at 11 years old, I'm this loving, caring, nerdy kid who, this was me, on the left side with the plaid shirt. I'm a nerdy kid with very lopsided glasses because of bad eyesight in one eye. And then the one on the right with the striped shirt is me during the sex abuse. So at 11 years old, we're having a water balloon fight in the neighborhood. We're having a water bucket fight. We're too poor to buy water balloons, and we're wetting each other with the hose, and we're all laughing. And all the kids put their money together to buy water balloons, and they send me to I think it was Safeway at the time, to buy water balloons here in Mission Hills. And they didn't have any. And the guy from Safeway says, there's a gift store down in Hillcrest you should go check out. So I go to this gift store and I ask the man if there's any water balloons in the store. And he says, yeah, I'm taking care of these customers. I'll be with you in a minute. And I'm this little nerdy kid, right? Innocent. So he then says, but the balloons are in the storage room in the back. Feel free to go back there. They're in a box on the floor. So I go to the back storage room and the boxes are sealed and I don't have permission to open them. So I turn back around to ask for permission to say, hey, mister, the boxes are sealed. And I experienced an extremely violent and abusive, that was the first day of my sex abuse. And about a month later, he threatened me, and he threatened me to keep coming back, or he was going to find out where I live and kill me and my family. And I came back. And I came back 3 to 4 times a week. And then he started inviting other men into the store at about a month later. So from 11 to 14, I was sex trafficked out of the bookstore here in Hillcrest for years without anybody knowing. And I hated who and what I was. I blamed myself. I blamed myself and believed my dad that it was my mom's fault for making me so soft, for making me a little nerd, for making me a caring little kid. And I was already confused about my sexuality. I would stare at the guys on the basketball courts, on the football field, and I never knew if I was sexually attracted because I was a kid or if I admired them and wanted to be like them. So I blamed myself even more. as if the perpetrator was able to smell the gayness on me. And I hated myself. So I made a decision to transform and change. And I shaved my head. I started growing facial hair at a young age and became a wannabe cholo. And so this is me at 15. And so I went from being a loving, caring, innocent kid to transforming into just somebody who had to appear hyper masculine on the outside to feel accepted and to hide everything that was going on in my life, especially my confusion around my sexuality. In the ninth grade, I beat up a guy. I went to Roosevelt Junior High School. I was that class clown and kid in school that was constantly causing trouble and ditching, but I was never in fights. Even though I took boxing at a local gym, I never got into fistfights. I was a kid that would take the wire cutters to school at Roosevelt, cut the fence near the back playground, and sneak into the San Diego Zoo and smoke weed all day, walking around the zoo, because I figured if my closest experience to National Geographic animals is going to be here at the zoo, then I may as well just enjoy it. And so, but one day I got in a fight and I beat up this kid and I cracked his head open against a stucco wall at Roosevelt during lunchtime for beating up a friend of mine. And I went into protector mode. And during the fight, I blacked out. All I could see was the faces of the hundreds of men that I was forced to have sex with. And so I was handcuffed to the chair in the principal's office by the school police officer. And he's screaming at me, "Jesse, what's wrong with you? This isn't like you." And I start crying. And I talk about it in my book. I said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt him. I never wanted to hurt him. I'm sorry. All I could see is that fucker's face. I apologize. All I could see is his face. All I could see is his face." And the police officer is asking, "Whose face? What are you talking about?" So the kid went to the ICU and his mom wanted to press charges. And I was potentially facing what I was told attempted murder. So I'm in the ninth grade. I'm 14 years old. I'm scared as hell. And he's asking me, "Who? What are you talking about?" And I said, "The man that's forcing me to have sex with him and other people." So that shifted the dynamics. Immediately, the police officer walked out. About an hour later, I'm still handcuffed, comes in with the school social worker, the principal. Not sure how they got a hold of the kid's parents. It's all kind of a blur. It happened so fast. The school social worker starts asking me questions about the alleged incident, the supposed abuse. And now I'm being questioned about what I'm saying because I may be using this as a way to get away from the police charging me. And so I'm reaching out for help, but now I'm being interrogated, right? So then, long story short, the school social worker gives me a stack of papers that my mom has to sign to put me in the victim witness program with the state, which is now called the Victims Compensation Program. And the police officer drops me off at home, and I'm told that I have 24 hours for my mom to sign these documents. I'm still bloody. My shirt's still covered in blood. I get dropped off at home. It's probably like 6 p.m. now here in Mission Hills. My mom's waiting outside. No one told her anything. And I now have to explain to my mom at 14 years old, without the help of a school social worker, a counselor, not even the police officer who dropped me off, that I'm being sexually abused. So in Spanish, we don't have a word for molest. In Spanish, molest is molestar. Molestar means to bother. So I'm trying to explain to my mom in my Spanglish, my Spanglish, that I'm being sexually abused. And I'm trying to say, "Mom, they're bothering me. They're bothering me. Me están molestando." because I can't translate the word appropriately. And like I said, no one's there to help me. Break this news to my mom. I don't know how many of you have kids, but like imagine your 14-year-old kid is trying to just break the news to you that he's being sexually abused. So I tell my mom, finally, I'm being bothered sexually. And it clicks. And she goes into a rage. Why didn't I come to her sooner? And I pushed her, angry. I told her it was her fault for making me into what I was, that if she made me a stronger kid than I would, and not be such a damn nerd, that this would have never happened to me. So I pushed her, I left, I came back about 3 hours later. She was still outside, sitting at outside the apartment crying. She ran to me and went to hug me. I stood there stoically with my arms at my side. And while she's crying, she's saying, I'm sorry, Mijo. I'm sorry if I failed you. I'm sorry, it's my fault. And I'm like, yeah, it is your fucking fault. Just sign the paper so I don't go to jail. And I go into the house and left her out there crying all alone. So about 2 days later, the detectives come to pick me up at school, and they forced me to go with them to identify the perpetrator by driving them by the gift shop. Once again, getting interrogated and questioned without a parent involved, without anyone present. They threatened me with handcuffs, and I go identify the store and the location. Um, about 2 days, about a week later, the shopkeeper disappears. Don't know where he went. And the store closed down shortly thereafter. And they were my drug supplier. They started getting me high at 11 and a half years old. So by 14, I was already a drug addict. I was already strung out on a bunch of chemicals, and turned to, I did school one day. Actually, I did school the day the detectives took me back to the office, and I went to Balboa Park. And I saw all the sex working that was happening in Balboa Park. And that started, my first client was that day. So at 14, I turned to street prostitution in Balboa Park, which was at one point a center for sex trafficking and hooking up, cruising the park. So I figured out that I fulfilled a certain niche for a certain segment of the population. And at 14 was when my first exposure, around 1988, was around HIV. And I started meeting other kids at the park, other trans kids, and we weren't trans back then. All the different identities. Everyone had certain nicknames for how we identified, and there were a group of trans kids that I would see at the park all the time, whose parents kicked them out into the streets and had nowhere to go. And so that was my first exposure to HIV. Was a fellow kid who was also turning tricks at the park. I believe he was 16, started getting KS lesions on his body, and told him to go to the hospital, and he eventually died at the AIDS hospice here in Hillcrest. So I was living these double lives. Fast forward at 16, I'm in school, I'm ditching for a week or two at a time. I'm making my mom's life hell. I'm calling her every horrible name in the book. She's working 2 to 3 jobs to put money on the table. Dad can't take it anymore, so dad ends up leaving. So it's just my mom trying to raise her 3 kids by herself. And so in 10th grade, I started driving at 14. Well, I started driving at 12 in Mexico, in Tijuana, because I started partying. I told you I started getting abused at 11. They were drugging me. So by 12 years old, I had already started rebelling. And when I would stay with family in Tijuana, my godfather and the family, I would party in La Revolucion at 12 years old at all the nightclubs there in TJ, at 12 years old. So one evening at around 6:30, halfway through my second semester of 9th grade, after I had left school, I apologized. That was it, I'm sorry. After I'd left school and turned a few tricks at the park for a few hours, I came home to find my mom sitting on the bathroom floor with blood all around her legs. She looked defeated with a blank, confused, almost scared expression on her face. It looks like she had slipped on her own blood trying to get up. I was terrified. Ama, I screamed. I went to help her up, ignoring the blood, but she wouldn't move. Me duele, mijo. No me quiero mover. It hurts, my son. I don't want to move. No longer crying, I said in a stern voice, you have no fucking choice. Either I call 911 and the ambulance is going to come and make a big scene, or you're getting in the effing car now to go to the emergency room. You effing decide. I helped her sit on the toilet and dampened a towel to wipe the blood from her legs. She tried to help me. Ya, mijo, yo puedo. There, my son, I can do it. I called my best friend and then I helped my mom wrap a folded bed sheet around her waist in case she started bleeding more. We helped her into the Buick and I drove her to the ER, afraid I'd get pulled over for being underage. As I drove, I looked at Ama and noticed how pale she was. I was too scared and determined to get us to the hospital safely to even cry. Once we arrived at the ER, Ama seemed too weak to walk, so I ran in first and begged for a wheelchair. A nurse came out to help me and they took Ama in while I went to park the car. In the ER, they ran a bunch of tests and found that she had 16 large fibroids that were causing blood clots and bleeding. They rushed her into surgery to do a DNC, an extremely painful procedure where basically the insides of the uterine walls are scraped to clear everything out. A little over a year later, she was hemorrhaging again. This time it was the summer between 10th and 11th grade. I was 15 years old. Mijo, my mom said, let's go to TJ, Tijuana. I heard there's a doctor there, a gynecologist who might be able to help run some tests and find out what's really going on. I saved some money, so let's go. I drove Amara Tijuana to a tiny doctor's clinic. It was nothing fancy. It was in a commercial space on the ground floor of a 2-story building with apartments on top. Inside, there was a small waiting room with a desk, a phone, and a door separated the doctor's quarters from the entrance. A woman welcomed us and took our payment. The doctor came and escorted us to the back. He asked me to leave, and I refused. It's my mom. I don't mind seeing her naked. With her permission, I'm not leaving her alone after what we've been through. After my mom undressed from the waist down and put her legs in stirrups with the sheet covering her, more to keep her warm than for privacy, she explained to the doctor what happened. Forgive my son. We're just very scared that I'm bleeding again and afraid that the doctors are misdiagnosing me on purpose. He told her that he was concerned and wanted her to get some x-rays and a bunch of other tests. When the images came back, he told her she had cancer in her uterus and cysts throughout her fallopian tubes. All of this could have been avoided, he told her. Had you come here years ago, we could have solved this problem. Them gringo doctors aren't helping you any. I'll write a report and take that with the images and demand that the doctors do something about this. But unfortunately, at this point, you'll need a full hysterectomy. Don't let them tell you otherwise. It's the only solution to stop the cancer from spreading. Demand to get a second opinion. He said, as a matter of fact, don't let them tell you no. That's what I hate about the gringo system. It refuses to offer healing treatment to avoid spending money, which keeps people sick. As a matter of fact, don't make an appointment with your doctor. Go straight to the emergency room because of your blood clotting and show the ER doctors these images. On the drive home across the border and to the ER, I was upset at my mom's diagnosis and at the fact that my mom hadn't received the care she needed and deserved from the hospitals in San Diego. It was Kaiser. Ama, however, tried to look at the positive. We can't avoid the past, mijo, and if surgery is the best solution, so be it. May God keep watching over us. God? Where the F has God been all this time? I yelled at my mom. Now she seemed defeated. Thank you, mijo, for helping me. It's not for me to question a doctor, especially when I only went to the 5th grade in Mexico. I wish I was smart and knew how to communicate to the doctors in English, but I don't, mijo. It's not your fault, Mom, but the care she'd been getting was all she could afford. Other healthcare options were too expensive. I was deferential to the doctor because we were poor and uneducated. In Ama's eyes, it wasn't proper to challenge a doctor. There were no patient advocates at hospitals focused on helping Latinos. And when we got back to San Diego, Ama was rushed into another surgery. Only this time, they performed a full hysterectomy. So fast forward.
Jesse, you have so much time. I'm just telling you it's 8:38, but really like go on as much as you need to. I just wanted to give you the time check, okay?
I got it, and I'm almost done. At
No,
16,
seriously, take as much time as you need.
thank you. At 16, right after that, I really went downhill. I was extremely angry. I was angry at our reality that we were living in. I hated being poor, and I ran away to LA, and I started turning tricks on Santa Monica Boulevard and Hollywood Boulevard. And at 18, I ended up weighing 135 pounds, sleeping in Balboa Park, turning tricks to get money to get high, and hopping in and out of cars of random strangers for $2, $5 a trick. And that's where I ended up. And so I remember sleeping under a bush in Balboa Park, hearing, it was in the late afternoon, and seeing these people rollerblading, these kids skateboarding, and wondering, why not me? What happened to me? Why did I have to live this life? I never wanted to use drugs. I never wanted to be sex abused. I never wanted to live the life. I just wanted to be an innocent, nerdy kid, to be left alone to read my National Geographic magazines. And so my ex-girlfriend, one night we had a huge fight. She told me, "I think you're a drug addict." I didn't speak like this. I said, "Nah, Holmes, I ain't no effing drug addict. You're the drug addict, eh?" You know, I talk like a little wannabe cholo. And she threw the yellow pages at me and asked me to get some help. So I called the Narcotics Anonymous hotline. And it was the NA hotline that told me about a meeting that night. And we went to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And I started to get a first glimmer of hope that something else was possible and that change was possible. But I felt different. I was 18 years old, young Chicano kid from the barrio, with a crazy life story, and didn't feel that I could identify. When I would go to AA meetings, it was a bunch of white people and pretty much rich white kids, if they were young, whose parents paid for drug and alcohol treatment. And let me back up. At 14, when the authorities got involved and my mom placed me on the victim witness program, I was assigned a mental health therapist by the state. So from 14 to 18, I'm turning tricks, I'm getting high, all the while going to weekly therapy sessions with a therapist assigned to me by the state who knew about the drug abuse, who knew about me turning tricks, who knew about me hanging out at bathhouses and adult bookstores as a child. It wasn't until after I wrote my book, because I got criticized by some of the language I used, and I said sex work. Or sometimes I'll use the term prostitution because of the generation in which this took place. But in reality, I was a sexually exploited child. From 14 to 18, I'm turning tricks in the streets and in all these adult business places. I was a sexually exploited child. And I had to learn that, right? And I'm learning that now about the appropriate language to use. But my therapist never did anything. So when I got clean, I was just a steady paycheck for her, about $125 for 45-minute sessions weekly back in 1988 to 1992. So when I got clean, my last night using, I was at a meeting. I didn't raise my hand to share that I felt different, that I wasn't like you, all you people that are in the meeting. I wasn't like you guys. I wasn't old. I'm just 18 years old. I'm cute. I'm young. I have my whole life ahead of me. I just want to keep getting high because I'm young and cool. I don't want to live the rest of my life going to Denny's after a AA or NA meeting, drinking coffee and eating apple pie. Like, I want more from my life. And so I left the meeting, and no one asked me to go to coffee. So I went back to a street corner near 30th and University, and a trick picked me up. And that night I got brutally raped by 3 individuals and was thrown out into the street naked from a 2nd-story townhome. And luckily they threw my clothes behind me. And this was in Golden Hills, near Golden Hills Park off of 25th. And I'm waving down cars for help. No one stops to help me. I get to downtown. Someone gave me change for a payphone. I call my sponsor and I'm crying and I said, I can't live like this anymore. I hate my life. Why did this happen to me? I can't live like this anymore. And he said, Jesse, you don't have to. Let me help you. And that was my last night using, March 11th, 1993, and I was 18 years old. And what happened after that was that a whole world opened up for me. People in recovery suggested I change my therapist. I started going to the public health department at 14 years old to get HIV tested weekly. To get HIV tested about every 3 months because I knew I was turning tricks and people were dying of HIV all around. And I remember at 14, when I went for my first HIV test, back then they would give you a paper with the number. They'd pull it off of a paper. It had like 3 different stickers. They'd stick it on the vials and they'd stick it on another paper. And they'd tell you to come back in 2 weeks. And they had all these questionnaires, all these questions about how many sex partners do you have? And I remember at 14, 15, 16, the sex partners kept increasing by the hundreds. And the public health person that was doing the HIV testing, God bless her soul, she would never judge me. She never did anything, but she would never judge me. And she'd just tell me to please take care of myself. So at 18, I get clean and sober. I go to community college. I get my associates. It takes 4 years to get my associates. I'm this 18-year-old kid. My community college counselor says, I want you to think about where you're going to go to college. If you can go to college anywhere in the US, where would it be? If you could travel anywhere, where would it be? And I thought about it for a minute. And I said, you know what, Holmes? I want to go to Omaha. She says, Omaha? Why Omaha? Well, because in Omaha, they have all the animals that they got from Africa because of a Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And I can go there and like study animals. I had no idea that, it was a documentary sponsored by Mutual of Omaha, which was an insurance company. That's where my head was at 18 years old. But I stayed in community college. I got my cosmetology license and worked at some of the best hair salons in San Diego while going to school full time. I graduated and I applied to 10 schools. And in high school, my GPA was say 1.2. I just found my transcripts and it was FDs, maybe 1 or 2 Cs or incompletes. In community college, once I got clean, my GPA went up to a 3.9. And we're smart people. And so it took me 4 years to get my associates, but I finally got my associates and I transferred to UC Berkeley. So I got a full ride to UC Berkeley, right? And so now I'm at UC Berkeley and I get to pick my own major. So I start to focus on HIV work because in 1997, I started doing volunteer work at HIV organizations focused on people of color. And I do my undergraduate thesis on the spread of HIV in the US prison system. And I get offered to study abroad. And she said, if you could study anywhere, where would you go? I was like, let's go to Spain. So a whole year I study abroad in Spain and I'm traveling all over Europe, taking pictures in front of the Eiffel Tower. I go to Turkey and I'm like, I get to visit the underground cities of Cappadocia, which I read when I was a kid in National Geographic magazines. So the world is opening up to me, right? And then I come back from Spain and I get the opportunity to live in Cuba. So I go do HIV research, HIV prevention strategies for sex workers in Cuba. And I'm like, wow, where's my life going? Come back, I get a full ride to Harvard. And I go to get my master's degree from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And I was initially going to focus on public health research because I wanted to focus on HIV. But I knew that I didn't want to go to medical school, and I didn't know where that would take me. But my life opened up. What I've done since then is I work in the field of philanthropy. At Harvard, I decided to focus on finance, statistics, economics, and I create social impact investments and philanthropic grant making programs for foundations that create greater social impact and deal with racial equity and justice issues. And now I'm expanding more into the sex trafficking, sex abuse space, where I can hopefully get foundations to invest in mental health issues and substance abuse and sex trafficking through philanthropy. And so the reason I was excited to present to this group when Davey asked is because I couldn't do what I do alone without the support of my wraparound team, which is my mental health, my physical health, and my doctors. And neither could my mom. I'm the caregiver to my 81-year-old mom now. Love my mom. We're like this, and I put her through hell. But she's been in and out of the hospital over the last 4 months. She went into septic shock recently because of a gallbladder issue and had a drainage tube coming out of her gallbladder for about 3 months. But I'm her caregiver. I do my best to give back. And one of the most important things for me is being my mom's advocate and my health advocate. Sometimes I can get really obnoxious with my doctors, where I'm demanding certain things within a certain HMO system. But what I love about my doctors is their bedside manner and the fact that they treat me like a human and they treat my mom like a human. But it took a long time for us to get there because I think for too long in the medical field, especially some doctors that I've had since I moved back to San Diego. I love Dr. Bowman. I love Dr. Beckerman. But there's been other doctors that are just arrogant, condescending, belittling, and dismissive, and come across with a know-it-all attitude. And don't assume that you as a person of color, unless it's funny how somebody will start treating me different, especially previous doctors I've had here in San Diego, when I mentioned that I went to Harvard, Berkeley, and UPenn, 2 Ivy League institutions, and that I'm educated, because the dynamics then tend to shift. And it really irritates me when that happens, because then I wonder, how do you treat other patients that come into the door? So I don't know if you got anything from this today. I hope that this starts off the year with some hope, with resilience, with a sense of you matter, and that the work you do really changes lives and impacts people's lives. So thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Jesse, thank you so much. That was beautiful and moving and very sad. Sort of took us through all the emotion. I'm going to open it up. Sorry, someone's, oh, maybe it's gone now. I'm going to open it up to see if anyone has a question for Jesse. I have something if no one, oh, there we go. I knew Anik would have something. Go ahead, Anik.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jesse. That was amazing. And it was such a pivoting situation that I think the question I have for you is, what do you think, aside from the help from that sponsor, made such a difference in your life, and that you managed to kind of completely change the trajectory and you know, recover from all that had happened before? Because I think a lot of us work with people who have been struggling with drug use disorders for many years, and sometimes it feels like there's no other way, and you don't know how people can, you know, like change their life trajectory. So hearing a life story like yours is very inspiring.
Thank you, Anik, for the question, and thank you for the kind words. It means a lot. I came out on Primer Impacto, which for those of you that don't know is like the Spanish version of 60 Minutes on Univision. And they were promoting both I'm Not Broken and the Spanish release of No Estoy Roto, which comes out January 24th. I'm new to social media. I received thousands of messages and DMs from people all over the world, Spanish speaking, saying, I have a son, I have a daughter, I have a client, also abused, also an addict. What can you do to help? And I get that question a lot. And what was a turning point for me? There's a saying that we have in recovery, which is, I can't do anything as a sponsor with my sponsees that will relapse and then disappear for a few years and then come back. I had to be done. I knew I was done. And we have this thing in the 12-step program where the first one is admitting powerlessness and accepting the unmanageability. That was easy for me. I knew that at 18 years old, I was living a life that most 18-year-olds don't live. I'm sleeping in parks. I'm turning tricks. And so I could have kept going downhill, but my first exposure, let me back up. I had these moments of magic. My moms, I call them my moms. I had these moments of magic where people would come in and plant the seed. You know, Anik Borges would say something in a casual 15-minute conversation and say, Jesse, I believe in you. There are other options for your life. Just plant little random seeds of hope and care and compassion that when it came time for me to walk into my first meeting, something clicked. I was able to connect all these pieces of different people that told me I was worthy, and that more was possible. But I had to believe it for myself. And sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if at 14, I was assigned a mental health therapist that understood cultural competency, the issues of family, was bilingual, and understood in trauma-informed care? What if my therapist actually approached my sessions differently and actually cared about me? Would I have gone and lived the life that I lived? Or would I have gone to Harvard right after high school? And I'll never know. But what I do know is I'm a huge advocate for culturally competent, multilingual, trauma-informed care that is very patient-centered. And what helped me, and something I try to do, is focus on the positive with my clients and to inspire them. I'm an executive coach. I'm a certified diversity coach and work with clients that are going through career transitions. And one of the things I try to do is to constantly focus on the positive. Sadly, it wasn't until I was ready and I was done. And when I hit bottom, I knew I was done. And sometimes I think what keeps me sober one day at a time is I'm 48 years old. I got 29 years. I'll be 30 years clean and sober in March. I don't want to hit bottom again and go back to turning tricks on the street, because I don't know who's going to pay me now. But that's just a joke. You know, my life is good. And thank you, Anik, for that question.
Thank you. That was such a useful answer, and it makes a lot of sense. And yes, like what happened with that therapy seems unbelievable, but I guess things have changed quite a lot in the past 20, 30 years. Hopefully.
They have in some aspects. Some aspects, I think we still have a lot to learn. One of the things that helps me with my doctors is, and I love my team, is they view me as a human being, and we're partners in my healthcare. We engage in dialogue and conversation, and I trust my doctors. That's a long way from where I came from. And so being able to, when I know that, and I'm not sure if it's Dr. Borges, when Dr. Davy Smith is treating me like a human being and sees me or makes me feel like I'm being seen, it changes the dynamic immensely.
Jesse, I have a question for you in the vein of what you're discussing. You know, you're saying your medical team, and I'm assuming those are the doctors you see pretty regularly. I think what as providers, you know, of HIV care and other, you know, sometimes more complicated care of individuals with multitude of psychosocial problems, I think the doctors that are with them closely know how to talk to them and I hope practice patient-centered medicine. I think the biggest issue, and that obviously doesn't hold true everywhere, but I think what concerns us the most is when we send patients to colleagues, we don't know how it's going to go, right? We're not there. There's only so much we can pass along. So I'm sure that experiences when you are referred somewhere else can be, you know, maybe challenging. How do you address a situation where you feel like you're not being treated like a human being? How do you not elevate the situation and without, you know, throwing out, well, I went to Harvard or this, because not everyone has that. What do you say to other providers to get them to understand where you're coming from and, you know, where your mom is coming from? Sorry if that was long-winded.
No, that is a great question because I literally went through that recently. My mom, we rushed her to the hospital. They admitted her. She had a heart attack in the ER because of the sepsis. When they did the entire procedure and they moved her up to her room when she was stabilized, me and her doctor went at it. And the doctor came in and was very formal and, you know, very formal and unemotional, very stoic, very factual. And I've already been up. I've barely slept. My mom is my concern. And I said, I need you to stop a minute. And she looked at me and I said, I need you to back up and I need you to change your tone a bit. I said it a little harsher than that and said, because you know what? I have a love-hate relationship with this institution. I've been my mom's caregiver since I was a child. And these are the issues that I'm constantly having to deal with and blah, blah, blah. And I vented. And then she didn't snap back, but she snapped back in a positive way and said, I need you to tone down your tone and how you're speaking to me because I'm doing my best and I've been on call. I'm doing blah, 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 blah. And so she threw it back at me, but in a human way and said, I'm doing my best. And I'm here because I really want the best for your mom. And the dynamics seemed to shift a little bit. And the power was kind of taken out of it, or the power dynamics, where she laughed, I laughed, and we were able to start going over my mom's care together. And she started to explain things to me and my siblings as if we were in kindergarten about the situation that my mom was going through. And with my mom there, so my mom started to understand as well. And that totally shifted the power dynamic. Too often, sometimes does a simple smile coming across your face, does that cost too much to put on when you're walking into a patient's room? You know, it's very different when a doctor comes in, happens to me all the time here in San Diego, walks in, hi, how are you? Very stoic and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, the situation is, as opposed to, hi, how are you? You know, welcome and blah, 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 blah. I'm Dr. So-and-so. It shifts the dynamic, the power dynamic. I shouldn't have to throw my credentials out to be treated differently. What happens and what I do is I do report. I do customer reviews, and I do report internally when I'm dealing with negative bedside manner. And I will be the first to shift doctors and say, I'm changing doctors because I don't appreciate how I'm being treated by so-and-so. And when I get treated a certain way by my care team or my mom's care team, I give accolades all the time, positive reviews, and report always back on the positive because I think it's important. I hope that helped.
No, it does. And I appreciate it. And I feel bad that anyone has to do that, to get someone to listen to them. And I think sometimes in the world of doctoring, I like how you brought up, bringing it down to a kindergarten level. I think all of us sometimes need to step back and say, how can I say this in a way that really makes sense and that's, palatable and tangible for people to understand. So I appreciate that.
And sometimes I have to tone it back to myself, and I recognize this.
Right.
Is that the receiving end doctor, sometimes I don't trust, sadly, that the chart has been reviewed
Right.
and the details have been looked into. So I immediately start going into a summary of what occurred.
Right.
And sometimes me as the patient or the caregiver need to feel heard and allow me to just kind of express the overview, so that then I feel that you as a doctor have a better understanding of what the dynamic is and the stressors as to what brought us there.
Yeah.
And I have to learn how to pull back and allow the doctor to be the doctor. But sometimes I need the team to let me know that I need to do that. There was a question in the chat about.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm usually much
About
better about this. So.
about how do you work with patients that are still stuck in drugs and sex work?
I'm just, Jesse, it's past 9 o'clock. If you can, that's totally my fault. I wasn't looking in the chat. If you can just address it quickly, because we do need to give people back their time.
Definitely.
But Jill, what about those of us who can stay? I'd love to, that was my question. So I would prefer a longer answer. How about a short one and a short one for folks who have to go, and then.
Awesome. I'm available.
Beautiful.
I think the problem is that the control of the chat needs to go. So unless you want to be made host.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So planting, what helps me was planting the seeds of hope. I didn't know about Narcotics Anonymous, but somewhere along the line, I must have heard about NA. I can't tell you where. I heard about AA because of the commercials they would have in the mid 80s, or, this is your brain on drugs. But somewhere along the line, people would plant seeds but what I didn't get was resources. Having resources in the office about, do you think you have a drug problem? Here's some resources. Here's the National Sex Trafficking Hotline. Sadly for men, there's very limited resources around men that are sex trafficking and sex workers. That is shifting. And I'm working with the federal government. I'm presenting to the federal government at the end of the month on strategies to address male sex trafficking and male sex work. But having resources available. And I don't know what that means to be a doctor and when you're crossing that fine line. But sometimes I would say, for me, had I known what resources were available, had my mom known, I'm sure my mom would have tried her best to get me into some of those resources. When she would reach out for help, no one knew what to tell her, but she was reaching out to her church. She was reaching out to other community organizations whose parents were also dealing with gangs, drugs, and violence at that time. And so educating ourselves about what resources there are and being able to make sure that those resources are available without crossing that personal confidentiality line, I would say would be important.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. So thank you, everybody. Not sure if we're out of time or if there's any other questions.
Yeah,
We are past. Oh, go ahead, Marvin.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Blanchard. Yeah, so Jesse, thank you so much for coming. I've been recording this, and I also have a copy of the chat. There's a lot of accolades for you and comments and stuff. So I can send you a copy of the chat too, just so you can kind of read through what people were saying afterwards once I have it all compiled. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited that Davey met you and invited you to come today. And so I'm hoping everyone took something from this. So thank you, everyone. Happy New Year.
That would be awesome.
so much.
And final words, please help support a local debut author. I'm Not Broken is available online or at Warwick's or your local bookstore, and No Estoy Roto comes out. So thank you everybody for your support. It means a lot.
Also, yeah, I
Thanks,
did put
Jesse.
a link to Jesse's book in the announcement. So if you're interested in buying it, the link's in there.
Would you recommend the Spanish or the English version?
Oof, they're both really good. The Spanish version for me, I read both on Audible, also on audiobook. The Spanish version was way more emotional for me than the English version, and I poured my heart into it. I don't know, that's going to be a tough one. The Spanish version hit me more in my heart because I knew that my mom is going to read it. And family members are reading it. So get both, and I'd love to hear your opinion.
I'll let you
Yes,
know.
yes.
Thank
I
you
want
so much.
Yeah, and I want it for those of us who work in, especially with the youth and just even our young, any patient who struggles with drug addiction. It helps our spirits to see you, to know, I can't wait to read your book. But it helps us too, because there's so much pain and struggle, and we suffer with our patients. It breaks our hearts to see our patients, stuck in these cycles. And so I just want to say thank you for being brave enough and courageous enough to write your book. And thank you so much for coming to talk with us.
Thank you, Gigi, and thank you, Manuel, for the comment also about being a Latino in the medical field. It's hard being an advocate for my mom and for my health, for myself, and when I come across the condescending, belittling attitudes, because it's triggering. When you're a survivor of sex abuse and your my perpetrators were condescending, belittling, and controlling, when I come across individuals that way, I immediately want to go on shutdown and on the defensive. So it feels important for me when I don't feel alone, and when I feel like I have a partnership with my providers. It means a lot. So
Just so you know, we dislike those patients, those physicians too.
Well, thank
All right,
you,
everyone.
everybody.
Take care. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.